Well, Julia, thank you so much for being here with me on the Entrepreneurial Success Podcast. Before we started or decided to do this podcast, you and I had such an amazing conversation beforehand. And I think this is one of the things that I want to share with the audience today about, how can I say this? You're a business coach and I'm a business coach, but neither of us believe in competition. But before we dive into a little bit more of business coaching, what it's like and the energy behind it, why don't I hand over to you so you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thank you, Henriette. My name's Julia Ngapo, and I'm, as Henrietta said, a business coach. I'm a holistic business coach, and I integrate energy work with what you might expect of a business coach, the practical tools. I'm a Reiki and Seichem master practitioner, and I use that alongside shamanic healing in business coaching. And whilst you might not think there's a natural sort of alignment between the two, those tools actually work really, really well on a very practical level.
Yes, and this is why I'm so fascinated and so excited to have you here, because it just shows how different we are as business coaches. You are more around the holistic approach with energy. I am much more on the strategic approach. And this is why I just love having this conversation. And I think everybody is just going to walk away with so many great tips today. Before we dive into all the good stuff, tell us a little bit about your story. I mean, how did you decide to become a business coach, or what was that thing that kind of led you to this journey?
Well, I started off way back, probably when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I studied law, and I worked for a few years in private practice, got really mercilessly bullied by my boss, and after sticking it out for 2 years, decided that enough was enough. I really couldn't take any more, and I left without any notion of what I was going to do. I couldn't get another job in the law because my self-confidence had hit an all-time low. And we were just about to go into or were partway through a recession. So there weren't that many jobs. So I was literally sort of thinking to myself, well, what on earth am I going to do? So I decided to set up in business. Now, that didn't really fill me with the sort of fear or dread that it might other people, because my parents were both self-employed and ran a business together. So for me, growing up, since the age of 11 or 12, it had sort of been just something that you did. Either you were employed or you were self-employed. So I set up as in self-employment, and I learned very quickly. It was a very steep learning curve, made all the mistakes that you could make. And I ran that business until I got married and had my 2 children. I worked for 10 years as marketing director for a fairly large, meaty organisation. And from then I actually moved to New Zealand. My husband is from New Zealand. We moved over to New Zealand for a few years, came back, and again I was at that sort of crossroads and thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? So I decided to set up in self-employment again and set up a marketing agency offering marketing consultancy and social media management. And I ran that for a number of years, but I got to the stage, and I think it was triggered by the fact that my children had grown up. And I got to that crossroads, which I think is common with an awful lot of women, where you get to a point in your life and you think, okay, what now? As I say, for me, that trigger was my kids had grown up and I was sort of having to redefine my role, if you like. But I sort of gave myself a good talking to, and discovered that the bit of my marketing consultancy, social media business, the bit that I really enjoyed was the strategizing with clients, and the face-to-face stuff, because as a social media manager, most of your stuff is writing content, and it's sort of behind the face of your, whoever you're working for. So I sort of investigated business coaching, decided that was something that was calling me, went off and retrained, and here I am today. So yeah, it was quite I always thought when I started, when I came out of university, I always thought that my business life was going to be a very straight path. I was going to study law, I was going to do this and this and this. Of course, you know, life isn't like that. It's much more of a peaks and troughs and a very bendy road. So yeah.
Oh my goodness. And it is fascinating to hear your story, because I think so many people can resonate with it while they hear this, is that they will also say, I started with something and thought this is going to be the rest of my life. You know, I'm going to go into marketing. I'm going to go into a managerial position. I'm going to go be an accountant, whatever that might be. And then quite a few years later, you find yourself going in a completely different, you know, journey that you never even thought of when you started out, basically. But it just shows the natural journey and how you develop as a person, because the development that you go through on your journey is kind of like what is guiding you in order to take on these other opportunities that you never even thought was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm really passionate with my own children in giving them the freedom to decide or to evolve and to decide what they want to be. I mean, why should we at sort of 18 years old commit the rest of our lives, you know, the next 50 years of working to something that we decide at, you know, when we're relatively young? You know, if it works out for you, all well and good, but nothing is set in stone.
No, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the topic for today, because the topic that we're going to discuss is very different from what I always talk about, the strategies, the planning. Even though you have that background with marketing, the holistic approach that you're taking, I think, is so fundamental. And for you as a business coach to use that approach, I think so many people can benefit from it, only because of my own experience. And so I can only talk for myself here, saying that I have gone through that holistic approach, and getting to learn more about me, but also realizing that there's so much more to coaching and so much more to life as general when you really just start being open-minded to this thing. So talk to us a little bit about coaching and the energy behind mindset in particular.
Well, I think the added input, if you like, of energy work is that it works really, really well with mindset. Well, it has a number of different applications. Most people, let's take Reiki as the most commonly known form of energy work. People tend to think of it as being a very hands-on treatment. You've got a physical ailment and you may go to a Reiki practitioner for a hands-on treatment. But it has an awful lot of other applications. And one of the best ways, I think, or one of the most effective ways it can be used is on clarifying just sort of what it does. What it has the ability to do is to just wash through you very gently and to look at, or to clear the blocks more effectively and more quickly than if you and I were, you know, in the standard sort of business coach way, we were looking at blocks and self-limiting beliefs and all that good stuff. It helps clients to break down those blocks an awful lot quicker. And certainly in terms of mindset, it's really effective in looking at the person that you are, and what it is that, you know, what your mindset is, what are the blocks that are holding you back, and moving you forwards from there.
Yeah, and I think it is so important because, you know, as we were talking about the blocks in particular, there are some that we kind of know about that are conscious, and then there are other that are subconscious that we don't even know about. And I find that the most interesting thing is, for me, and sorry, this is me going a little bit spiritual again, but I find that the most interesting thing is that, you know, we might not remember certain memories, as an example, that has created these blocks. But the thing is those memories, or those kind of memories, those experiences we have, always have a feeling attached to it. And that feeling is the thing that your brain remembers. And that's what is causing the block. And I do find that with the energy work, in particular, like you just mentioned, Reiki as an example, the kind of energy work that you would do would really just dive down into the subconscious and clear some of those blocks that you might not have even known were there. And this is why it's so powerful to do things with yourself, such as Reiki, but to use it in a business format whereby those limiting beliefs, those blocks can really start getting triggered and cleared out a lot quicker than, let's say, can I just say, somebody who's starting to practice meditation, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. And Reiki particularly, and Seichem also actually, work with the higher self, work with that subconscious very, very effectively. And it's also that Reiki will always, when you're given Reiki, the energy, and Reiki is a Japanese term which literally translates as universal life force energy. The energy is channeled. It isn't my energy that I'm giving somebody. It's the energy of the universe, because every animate object around us has energy. We are all energy. We're 90% water. So we're energy. Everything is energy, and I have the ability, because I've been attuned, to channel that energy. Anybody has that ability, but it's just that the channel is blocked until you are attuned. And once you're attuned, you're able to channel that energy. So when I use energy with a client, or use Reiki with a client, the energy will intuitively go where it is needed within that person's body. So it'll intuitively, don't ask me how, we just have to approach it with an open mind, in the same way that we know there's a wire connecting our computer which allows you and I to talk to each other. We don't quite understand how the technology works, but we trust that it does. Energy is exactly the same, and it will allow the recipient to receive that energy where it's needed most, and to literally break down those blocks with no effort from that person. The energy just does what it does, which is amazing.
Yeah, if I can use the analogy, it's almost like, a pipe that water flows through, a hose pipe.
Sure.
But as soon as there's a kink in the pipe, the water can't flow anymore. So what it basically does is, this energy is the flow. Let's say the flow of the energy is, the water that flows through the pipe. But what the Reiki does, it kind of just goes and unkinks the pipe almost, so the flow of the energy can still keep going. Is that a good analogy to kind of use? That's a really good
analogy. I might pinch that, actually.
Oh, you can. It's just, I don't know why a hose pipe just popped up as you were talking. I was like, well, it looks like it could just be a kink in the hose and it needs to be sorted.
Yeah. It's an amazing tool to be able to use.
Yeah.
And I am really privileged.
And this is really fascinating, because obviously, I have never done Reiki before. So for me, it's a completely new concept. And I'm sure some of the people here in the audience would even go, what the heck is Reiki? And I know you kind of explained it a little bit. But from your point of view, how can the work in energy also help us with self-belief, confidence?
Again, it's about that shift in mindset. It's about, it comes down to an awful lot of things. It comes down to self-care. Part of being attuned to Reiki, you have to sort of make a commitment to various different things. And one of those is a commitment to self-care, because you can't give energy you can't pour from an empty cup. So I can't channel energy for you if I'm anything less than looking after myself.
Yeah.
So when you start sort of introducing self-care into your life, you build up important, you start to see yourself differently and realize that you are important, that you are worthy. And one of the things that I work a lot with women in business is on self-worth, and on understanding value and charging what you should be charging, and all those sorts of things. So it's a really useful tool. It literally can sort of change your mindset, And as I say, it's something that I work quite, you know, a lot with women and with clients in.
And self-belief is one of those things that can really stop us in our tracks. I mean, from my experience as a coach working on the strategies and the strategic elements, it's almost like, you know, as human beings, for us, seeing is believing. And we can only believe something once we've seen it working.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what you're trying to do is like, there can't always be evidence. The evidence will come, but you've got to believe before you see it, basically.
Yeah.
And this is where I think with the self-care, I think because it is something that is so vital for us, immediately as soon as you start looking after yourself, you start feeling better. And that is already evidence that, hey, you're taking care of yourself. And so with that, your belief will grow. With the work that you're putting in, it's working. So that kind of evidence that we need all the time, it starts with the self-care. So I can see how important that element is just to grow your own belief.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to be, you know, it's no good being a shrinking violet in business. You've got to stretch yourself out of your comfort zone. You know, it's called a comfort zone for a reason. And whilst it's all nice and warm and fuzzy in there, you know, growth comes when you stretch that zone and you move outside it, and confidence is integral to that. Yeah. If you haven't got the confidence, if you don't value yourself, then you're not going to do it. It's, you know, it is a fundamental, really, just building that. That's not to say that you've got to be arrogant or cocky or have all the answers, because nobody does. We all have those moments, I'm sure you'll agree, where we're thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to do this. You know, you're sort of teetering on the edge of whatever precipice you're standing on. But once you start building that self-confidence, you do see the results, and you do see, as you say, that, you know, you are worthwhile and that you can do this thing that they call business or self-employment.
I actually have something that I want to share about confidence. And this is a little thing that I kind of started explaining as well to my clients. And I hope you don't mind me explaining it here. But you know how everybody has got this little diagram about confidence, and they say, this is your confidence circle, but the goal you want is this little circle all the way there. And then you've got to go through all of this vastness, this blackness, this white, whatever it is, in order to get to your goal. And I think this freaks people out, because it's kind of like, now I've got to step into this vastness, this unknown, this darkness in order to reach my goal. But what I always want to share with people is, remember, you never step into the unknown. As soon as you take that first little step out of your comfort zone, basically what happens automatically is you go, oh, well, the walls haven't caved in, lightning hasn't struck, well, you know, it's okay, I'm alive. But what happens at that moment is you get a reward, and that reward is the confidence going, yeah, you did it, amazing. And at that same time, your little confidence circle grows around you, protecting you again. And then you take another little step, you get the confidence, and your circle grows again, protecting you again. All the while you're growing, but your confidence is growing with you until you reach your goal. So you're never stepping out into the unknown. And I think as soon as you start looking at it from that perspective, you know, all of these things with what you're saying, you know, the self-belief, the care, everything just falls in place, because now you're going, oh, I can see that, you know, if I take a little step forward, I'm not going to have to freak out, because I'm still going to be covered. I'm still going to be safe.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, actually. And it's absolutely true. It's about, I mean, when we look at any long-term goal or mid-term goal, it is scary, and it should be actually a little bit scary, because it's got to push us out of that comfort zone. Sometimes it's called a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. But you're right, it is all about those little steps. It's not one giant leap for mankind. It's those little steps that we maybe don't notice as we take them. We're maybe not aware of the progress that we're making. So when I talk to clients, it's very much about recognizing how far they've come, as much as looking at how far they've got to go, because it isn't all about what's in front, it's about what's behind as well, as much as learning from mistakes as much as celebrating successes.
Yeah. And this is where the self-care comes in again. You know, celebrating those successes makes you feel good, and it makes you feel like, oh my gosh, achievement, look at what I've done. So it's all part, you know, I love how it all comes together. It's all part of that self-care again, and again, building your own belief. Let's talk about clarity, because I think this is also another thing. Just a quick thing here. I find that so many people always come to me and ask me, how do I do this? How do I do this? And I'm sure you get so many questions as well as the how. But, you know, clarity is one of those things that you don't just immediately get, in a sense. It's something that you kind of have to grow. You're going to go on a journey, and the more you move forward, the more you get clarity. And this comes again back to confidence. But from your holistic approach with the energy, how do you find clarity, and how do you find that combines everything, so to speak?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I can't really answer it. Well, I wish I could with a, you know, this is how it works way, because the way that energy works is actually far beyond sort of human understanding, because I could go really deep, but it actually transcends time. So with energy work, you can go and heal the past, and you can go and heal the future. That's not about time traveling. It's about looking at your response and healing trauma and things like that, past experiences. But in terms of clarity, I think it's, you know, I wish I did have that answer of how it exactly works, but I don't. It's about, in terms of the energy work, about working with the client and understanding their goals, because I look at them in a very holistic fashion, i.e. the person behind the business as well as the business. It's about understanding their values and getting clear on what success means to them. And I think once you understand what success means to you, because success, I'm really against the term success being this intangible thing that we're all supposed to strive for, when actually success to you means something totally different to success to me.
Yes.
So I work really hard with clients to define what that success is for them. Is it that they take more staff on and grow their business? Is it that they start winding down because they're looking to retire? Is it, you know, that they get a full order book? Whatever their sort of definition of success is. And I think clarity is an integral part of that.
Yeah.
Clarity of vision, certainly.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, yeah, it evidently starts with having the end goal in mind. That's what it is all about. Having that clarity, and then the in-between on how to get there comes together at the end of the day. But I find, like I said, so many people come to me, how do I do this? How do I get this? And it's like, well, you don't have a goal yet. So of course you're not going to know the how. And don't worry about the how. You know, once you're determined in order to achieve a goal, the how will show up.
Yes.
But yeah, from an energy perspective, that clarity, I think, is super important in order to understand, you know, where you fit in. And it's so true on success. I've had so many people talk about success in different ways, and there's no wrong or right. Everybody is unique in that matter. What about, you mentioned something a little bit earlier, and that this was the release of trauma. I think this is quite valuable as well. And what would your take be on that? When you would approach a client, what would you say about the release of trauma?
I've worked with a number of clients who've been quite traumatized, for example, by past employment. Perhaps they've had a boss who's been, you know, less than perfect, shall we say, and has caused them the trauma. I've worked with, for example, a lady who'd been employed for a number of years in a reasonably senior position, thought that she was there for life, and her boss made her redundant and brought a relative in to take her position. And she was, when I started working with her, she was really, really traumatized by it, quite understandably. And when you're traumatized, it tends to sort of infiltrate every area of your work. You lose that self-confidence, you lose that self-worth, you lose that vision, because suddenly you're on this path that you didn't ever think that you were going to have to be on. So one of the tools that I use is shamanic healing. Now that sounds really, really, I get it. It sounds really woo, and it sounds like I'm, you know, dancing around a camp bonfire, biting the heads off chickens or something. But it really is the most gentle of energy work. It's the oldest form of energy work, practiced by indigenous peoples all around the world, although we tend to think of it as being sort of South or Central American. And it could be a practical application, could be something as simple as imagining that, in this example, that boss, imagining him in a plastic box where he can see you, but he can't respond. He can hear, but you can't hear him speaking. And then you can stand there, imagine that he's in front of you, and you can just vent at him and tell him exactly what it is that you think of him. And what that does is to our brain, allows our brain to process the trauma that we've been storing up. And the problem is with anything like that, the more we store it, the more energy we give it, and the bigger it gets.
Yeah.
And it sort of ticks the box as far as our brain is concerned. Our brain can then file that episode away as sort of, you know, done with. So it's a really, you know, it's nothing sort of weird about it. It's a really simple thing that you can do. Another thing you can do is to write letters to your trauma. So if you had, and this works with sort of self-limiting beliefs as well, that inner critic, write a letter to that inner critic, pour out your heart, say whatever you want to. You can swear, you can, you know, shout if you can shout on paper, you can do whatever you like, and then rip that letter up and burn it. And that's a shamanic technique. So they're really down-to-earth techniques, but they're very, very effective.
Yeah, it's interesting because those are kind of things that we all know about. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories about people saying, you know, write something on a piece of paper and light a candle and burn it. But I think we never had a name for it. So the shamanic healing really kind of puts a name from it, and also describes the history of where it's coming from. But I think one of the most important things that you mentioned there is this: whatever trauma you have is kind of stored in the brain as still it's an open thing. You haven't found closure for it yet. Yeah. And I think this is so important with what you're doing then, is you're finding closure. You're ticking that box and saying, done. Brain, you don't have to remember this anymore. Yeah. Let's keep going forward now. Yeah. And I think that is what is the most important thing is the brain will always remember something, or always will find answers for something that it haven't quite finished yet. And that's what is holding us back. And I think this is also where the limiting beliefs and the blocks and things come in, because there are still things there that you feel you need answers for. The brain is telling you that it needs answers for, it needs closure. So I think it's really important to kind of look at it from an energy perspective with what you said, and kind of close it from there, because yeah, you can go into the back, you can go into the past and go and clear some things there in order to help you move forward. Yeah. And I mean, that's only really the tip of the iceberg with shamanic healing. I mean, there are certain sort of schools of psychotherapy that believe that when you suffer trauma, a part of your psyche is hived off, sort of shaved off, if you like. And so all of us, any of us who've been through any sort of trauma in our lives, may have sort of these sub-personalities. And there is an aspect of shamanic healing where you can go and reunite yourself with these sub-personalities and sort of bring them back into the whole. It's really effective. And that is sort of going a little bit deeper into the whole sort of shamanic thing, but a really useful thing to be able to do. And it makes such a difference. Yeah. No, I find it very interesting. And I think I used the word interesting too many times now in this episode, but it's because I'm fascinated. There's another word for you. There's so much that we can learn as human beings, not just as business owners, but as human beings, about energy and how to use energy for ourselves, for personal growth, but also just to discover, what you can do for other people with it. So for me, it's just one of those kind of, how can I say, untapped tools that we can really, really use. And this is why I was so excited when you and I met for the first time and we started having that great conversation. I was like, we've got to do a podcast. We've got to bring you on. We've got to share this with people, because there are ways to work through these kind of problems. And, knowing people like yourself who are out there and doing this and helping people is so good. But putting everything together, you've got an amazing freebie for everybody. You've got a workbook that's going to help everybody. Why don't I hand over to you? Tell us about this free workbook and what they can get from it.
Thank you. Well, it's a business vision workbook. It's called Steps to Success. And it literally it starts by taking you backwards to look at what over the past year. I mean, you might want to take it back slightly further than a year, given that we've all had, a hell of a couple of years. What has worked in your business, what hasn't worked, and what you can learn, because we can learn as much from, there's an NLP, neuro-linguistic programming phrase, which is that there is no such thing as failure, only feedback. And I really believe in that. So what feedback can you give yourself from this past segment? And then bringing that forward, the workbook will help you sort of bring that forward into lessons to inform your future. We then do a visualization of where you would like to be in a year's time, 3 years' time, 5 years, whatever. There's space to sort of note it all down. And then we sort of create the action steps that are going to take you to that point. So it's a quite comprehensive workbook, but it's really useful in creating that vision of where you are now, where you've come from, and where you want to be.
Yeah, and I think it encapsulates beautifully with what we shared here today. So thank you so much for making that available. If you kind of have that vision about what it is that you want to achieve, that's where the clarity comes in. And just talking about that, I think everybody's going to see it all mapping together, where you've come from, getting rid of all those blocks, recreating your self-belief, looking after yourself, and then the how to get there. That's kind of like the in-between that you've got to work through, and taking those steps. And with the workbook, you're making that so beautifully available for everybody, just to guide them in order to show them some of the steps that I can take. So thank you so much for making that available. Now, I would highly suggest that those of you listening or watching this video, you should go and download this workbook. It doesn't cost you anything. It will just give you enough clarity in order to take another step forward. So the link will be below in my show notes. You can go and get it there. And then I would also suggest that if any of the things that Julia mentioned here today that kind of strike your curiosity and you're curious to learn more about pranic healing, about how she can help you maybe with Reiki, clearing up some of those blocks, getting the clarity yourself, building your belief, your confidence, all of those things, I would suggest that you get in contact with Julia and see how she can help you. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you. So her website details will be in the show notes, including LinkedIn and Instagram. So you can also send her there a message. Julia, thank you so, so much. However, do you have one last little tip that you want to share with the audience before we go?
I think it is, don't compare yourself to anybody else, because you are unique. You're here to make a difference. So don't compare yourself to anybody, and work on that self-belief, because that's key.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. Thank you so much again. It was a privilege to have you here, and thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge. And for those of you listening, go and download the freebie. I'm sure it's going to help you a lot. Julia, we'll be in touch very soon again. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, Henriette.